Hello, and welcome to Beyond Biotech, the weekly podcast from Labiotech. I'm Dylan Kassane, and this is episode 154 for the podcast. You get older, your back hurts. Seems like a truism, doesn't it? Just one of those things. The World Health Organization reports that more than 600 million people suffer from lower back pain globally, making it the leading cause of disability worldwide. Chronic lower back pain, where the pain persists for more than 3 months, develops in between 5 and 10% of all lower back pain cases, with life-altering impacts for patients. And that's where today's guest, Steve Ruston of Persica Pharmaceuticals, comes in. Persica is developing a groundbreaking and transformative treatment for chronic lower back pain. They target the cause of chronic lower back pain, the underlying bacterial infection. Unlike conventional approaches that manage symptoms, Persica's drug enables the infection to clear, reducing inflammation, pain, and disability right at the source. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Steve as he walks me through Persica's mission, ambition, and science. Steve Ruston, welcome to Beyond Biotech.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today.
Steve, you've had a long career working in research, in academia, then into entrepreneurship as well. From your really early days in organic chemistry through to your role today as the CEO of Persica Pharmaceuticals, what really sparked your interest in getting into this area, this biotech and pharmaceutical sector?
So, as you say, I did a PhD in synthetic chemistry in the UK, which I did enjoy. And it was always my aim to move into industry at the completion of the PhD, preferably deploying the chemistry skills I'd learned in the first instance. And therefore, I joined the first of 3 quite large pharma companies. And the role was then to develop the synthetic chemistry processes by which emerging new drugs would be manufactured once they hit the market. That was great fun, quite challenging, because if a drug is going through development rapidly and the progression into larger scale clinical trials which are needed before it can hit the market, you need to be able to make the drug quickly, to the right quality, with the right shelf life, etc., etc. So it was an application of science to a really focused development and corporate timeline, which was a good start for my career. However, I always intended to move into wider operations, manufacturing, for example, and I had a number of career breaks in the pharmaceutical companies I worked with, which widened and deepened that experience, still building on chemistry, but also learning related sciences, all of which are required in drug development. So some biological sciences, for example, regulatory understanding of what needs to be done in order to get a drug approved. And then I had the opportunity to move into an international role. So there was a kind of stepwise development, but founded in good science. I've had the pleasure of working with some brilliant scientists now in many companies in different locations, and that's where the interest started, and I've kept it ever since.
Along the way, some of these drugs that you've been involved with, you've had a hand, I guess, in Tagamet, Zantac, Viagra. These are blockbuster drugs, and you were involved in some part in the development of these. You talked about lessons and the experience. What sort of lessons did you take from working on these sorts of blockbuster medications?
Well, firstly, particularly early in my career, my contributions to the team working on those drugs were small. They were huge teams. But even when the medicine is approved, there are often refinements to either the way it's made, or you get line extensions. So maybe the product starts off as a typical pill, but you may then have some different formulations which have different attributes. So there's a constant investment in developing the products, developing the patent estate, and you're very well aware, even at a relatively junior level, of the commercial imperatives around this. So one of the lessons I learned in my second main company was that Tagamet was a groundbreaking anti-ulcer drug. For example, it was first-in-class medicine, but then it was very seriously challenged by Zantac, which Glaxo developed. And there was a huge corporate battle, some litigation, some patent challenges, none of which I happily was involved in personally, but you see all of that stuff going on in those sort of organizations, and it just widens your perspective. But also I learned that we were working on second and third generation anti-ulcer drugs, and the development program had reached a pretty advanced stage. And then for technical reasons or safety reasons, the programs were terminated. And we had put an awful lot of time and effort in, and including the teams I was an active part of, which showed there's no guarantee of success, even if you're working in a field which has got a developed pathway forward with the first-in-class drugs already on the market. So I learned early on that drug development is very difficult, and most programs, most individual parts of programs don't succeed, and that's still the case, I think, for most companies today. So if you can get associated with something that is a success, it's a great feeling, and you sometimes have to work a long time before you experience something like that.
You're based in the UK today, but you said you've had some international experience as well in North America and Latin America. I mean, how have these shaped how you work at Persica today?
That's a really good question. So I've been fortunate to have a very interesting and quite wide-ranging career path. I should say that many of the career opportunities I got weren't necessarily planned. So, for example, I moved into my first role in manufacturing in the UK, and then shortly afterwards, the company concerned decided to close that part of the facility. So the choice then was either to go back into R&D, which, while I enjoyed, it's what I had left already, or they said, actually, we've got an opportunity for you in Latin America. Would you like to take it? And I did take it. And I was doing chemistry again in a manufacturing facility, but in a completely different part of the world, a different language, different culture, at least on the surface. It was a fantastic opportunity. I learned so much, including the ability, then at least, to be able to work in Spanish, which I wouldn't have done otherwise. But what I learned was that people, they needed some investment in them as individuals. They needed investment into their facilities and into their plant and equipment, and I was there to do some of that. But people respond to how you treat them. That's my overwhelming lesson, and it was a fantastic experience. So yeah, I was in Latin America for 2.5 years, but spent quite a few weeks in the USA because these were American companies. Well, it was an American company I was working for.
Now, the company you're working for now is, and where you're the CEO, is Persica Pharmaceuticals. Tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing there and the mission of this company.
Okay, so Persica is a small biotech company headquartered in the UK, and we were able to set that up by hiring a small number of very experienced people with pharmaceutical industry backgrounds. There's been huge attrition in R&D and manufacturing facilities in the UK and many other countries. So there was a pool of experienced people around, and Persica was set up to bring forward a new drug for the treatment of chronic back pain, which is a huge medical issue. It affects so many millions of people globally. And the founders of our company, who in part were academic researchers and medical practitioners, had established a link for certain back pain patients that the likely cause of their pain was a bacterial infection in the spine, and that if you could treat that infection, not only could you alleviate the symptoms, but you would be treating one of the underlying causes of the disease, of the pain, and that is one of the big differentiators from what we're doing and other approaches to back pain. So we were set up quite specifically to work in one area of research, chronic back pain, and to bring forward a drug that would meet the needs of patients and the regulators and the markets. And that was the mission statement from day one. And we're very pleased with the progress we've had over the last few years, which has recently culminated in a successful conclusion to our first human patient trial of our new drug.
And you're collaborating then with the academic institutions where you're able to draw people from healthcare institutions as well?
Well, we have a number of, as you will know, drug development is a multidiscipline activity. In the large pharma companies, most of those activities are done inside the company. We're a small biotech, so we can't do that. So the way we do the work is to have contracted partnerships, primarily with the organizations that are serving the pharmaceutical industry, so manufacturing, for example, regulatory advisors, preclinical development activities, testing of the drug in terms of its shelf life and stability and quality. So we've built a network of partners. Most of those are not academics, although we do have links into academia for specialist insights or references, and we still have good contact with our academic founders. But they are academics; they're great at what they do, but they don't have experience of drug development, certainly targeted at human clinical trials, and then eventually into the marketplace. So we're more industry focused than academia, I guess, in our partnerships.
Now, the approach that you've got at Persica is antibacterial. It's not an opioid. You're not using an opioid to address the pain there. Has that helped when you go out into this market now where people are maybe shifting away from opioids if they can?
Very much so. And we've commissioned recently some independent market research around the likely receptivity for our approach, assuming we get the same results in the larger clinical trials, which will be the next stage in our drugs development. The use and abuse of opioids is a huge problem, as you will be aware, and there's all too visible consequences of that in various places around the world. So the idea that you can bring forward an effective treatment for people who've got significant back pain, and in many cases have had it for years, without recourse to heavy-duty analgesics, including opioids, will be attractive. And I said at the outset, what we do here is try and address the cause of the problem, not just treat the symptoms. And we're hopeful that if things work out on the larger trials, as we are appropriately optimistic that they will, not only will you not be treating people with opioids, many of our intended patients are taking long-term analgesics, including opioids themselves, as a palliative treatment. And I think there's every prospect that the reduction in analgesic use and the reduction of opioid use can derive for what we're doing, and that would be really exciting.
I think what's really interesting about your approach is what you say about not treating the symptoms. So we're not just trying to take the pain away, we're trying to address the cause of the pain. Is a bacterial infection, is it always the cause of chronic lower back pain, or are you looking at a subset of patients there?
No, it's not the only cause. There are many causes, and some can be quite simple. If you overdo it digging the garden, for example, you may well cause yourself some back pain that's relatively transient. It can probably be fixed by mild analgesics or some manipulation or whatever. Our patient groups have failed what we call conservative therapy, so they will have had it an absolute minimum of 6 months. The things that you normally get advised to do when you first go to your doctor don't work for these patients. There may be other causes. So, for example, if somebody unfortunately has a tumour in their spine, that's not what we're going to address, or you've got other physical deformities perhaps. So we think maybe 25% of chronic back pain patients may benefit from what we're trying to do. That's still a very large number because the number of chronic back pain patients globally is a huge number. So not everyone will benefit, and we don't claim that. But we think there's a very significant number and therefore a very significant potential market for people likely to respond to our approach.
Tell me about this approach, the actual treatment there. It's an injection, and it's not multiple injections, right? It's not one every month or one every week.
No, it's a really good question. So our drug has been designed and developed within Persica, and it has some particularly novel attributes. So it's an injection of a long-used generic antibiotic, so it's not a new molecule, but the way it's packaged in the injection vehicle is unique, and that derives our intellectual property and patent estate. And what we do is we make a very fine powder of the antibiotic and suspend it in a liquid which is called a thermosensitive gel. This has the property that at ambient or cold room temperature, it's a mobile liquid. But when it warms up to about 37 degrees in the body, it turns into a thick paste. And the intention is that you inject it to where the infection is, and we can see that on the MRI images, which help us identify our patients. You inject it directly to the site of the infection, and the delivery of the antibiotic as a very fine powder in this gel-type liquid as it becomes, gives you a depot effect. It gives you a local concentration of antibiotic, which lasts for several days, and that gives the antibiotic time to kill the bacteria. And then it slowly dissolves and disperses over about 4 to 5 days. So the overall dose in your system is much lower than the standard course of antibiotics, and it consists of just 2 injections in the first week of treatment. That is the end of it. So you're talking about a very high localized dose, but very small, very low systemic exposure in the body. So the side effects from treating the drug will be minimal. It's a well-known, well-characterized and well-used drug anyway. We're injecting it at a level lower than its normal use. And therefore, systemic exposure and the risk of developing antibiotic resistance by using very high doses of antibiotics for a long time are eliminated by design. And that's why we've got, I think this is our USP. We're treating the underlying cause of infection. We have a unique formulation with intellectual property protection. And to the best of our knowledge, and we've done, as I say, some market research around the competition, nobody else is doing this, at least at the moment. So we're very excited by all of that. But to come back to the start of your question, it's a very short course, just 2 injections, and that is the end of it. It does take time for the effects of killing the bacteria to kick in. The bacteria cause inflammation and bone degradation in the spine. Which is why patients have their pain and disability most of their waking hours, and sometimes 24/7. And for the bone to remodel, for the inflammation to go away, and for the pain to subside, it takes, it can take up to a year or even longer to fully benefit. But we do see substantial improvements, certainly by 3 months. And in treatment of chronic back pain, that's a pretty good result. And the reduction in pain and disability that our trial has shown are very substantial for the patients who responded to it. And it can be a transformative experience if they respond to the drug in the way that it's designed to do.
Tell me more about those impacts on patients, because I see the phase 1b trial, you had this reduction in pain, you talked about a reduction in disability. What does that actually mean in practical terms for a patient? What can they expect?
So pain, if you ask somebody how much pain you're feeling, it can be slightly subjective. So there's a well-recognized pain score that goes from 0 to 10. And if you say that 10 is the worst pain you can possibly imagine, whatever that might be, that's excruciating, whereas 0 to 1 is little or no pain. Most of our patients were coming in around 6 to 7 on the pain scale, which is pretty significant. And they would see perhaps 30, 40, 50% reduction in pain scores during the treatment. But more measurable is the reduction in disability. So if it's too difficult for you to bend down and tighten your shoelaces or pick your children up or ride a bicycle or go to work, you can measure those impacts. So we did see significant reductions in both pain and disability. And the impact of that, and this is what our founders also showed with their treatments using very high doses of oral antibiotics, the patients who responded to this, the life in many cases was transformed because they could go back to having a normal life or something very close to it, whereas before that their life is very significantly impacted. And it's challenging, and if you live with it all the time, not only can you not do the things that you would like to do, it can cause mental problems as well. People get frustrated or what have you. And the cost to healthcare systems is enormous because it's a chronic problem. So I think for us, reduction in disability is at least as important as reduction in pain, although, of course, they go hand in hand.
You mentioned before something like 25% of chronic lower back pain patients could benefit from something like this. How do you identify these patients? Is it all by MRI, and how important is that to the process?
So that's another really good question. And one of the key ways of doing it at the moment is through MRI imaging. So the patients that we think are likely to have the infection in the spine display some well-characterized or well-recognized images on their MRI scans. And these are called modic changes. And our medical founders linked the appearance of those changes to this potential infection. So you do it through a combination of detailed pain history, pain scores. Clearly, if there's another mechanical cause of pain, they probably haven't got the infection. But right now, it's the MRI is key to identifying the likely patients who will respond. I need to explain that the amount of bacteria in the disc is quite low in terms of bacterial count. You don't see the normal consequences of a very high bacterial load. So if you get a staph infection, for example, you may have temperature or fever. The patients don't show that. And because the bacteria are located right in the disc of the spine, it's virtually impossible to go in and take cultures of the bacteria to confirm that the patients actually have got the infection. But by our best estimates so far, albeit on a small-scale trial, it's likely that somewhere between 50 and 60% of our target patients will have the infection. It's quite difficult to measure low levels of these bacteria for technical reasons, and perhaps in time there will be some biomarkers developed that will help the identification of the patients. But you're right. Right now, it's largely through MRI imaging and detailed pain histories.
The current treatments we talked about before, they tended to treat the symptoms, and that was either a physical treatment like a physiotherapy, or it could be an opioid that's used to treat the pain or address the pain. How does this actually, your approach, how does it change the landscape for treatment? If it really is just 2 injections in a single week and then the bacteria is killed, it's gone away, this must change a lot of things then.
Well, we think it has the potential to change or add another element into the standard of treatment pathway which already exists. So we've talked about the need to be able to see MRI scans of patients. And in some countries, the UK is not particularly well served with the availability of MRI for various reasons. But in other countries, that's not true. So our founding research was done in Denmark, for example, and we know the availability there of MRIs is much higher than in the UK. But in the United States, clearly the biggest market of all, our expectation is that by the time a patient has had chronic back pain for a minimum of 6 months or more, they most likely will have had an MRI or would be en route to getting one. And if the patients recognise at that point, with the images on the MRI that I've referred to, we believe a short course of 2 injections will sit very nicely into the current treatment pathway, i.e. after failure of standard of care, early attempts at treating the problem, but before much more serious and significant surgical procedures. So for some patients, currently their end game is to go into major spinal fusion operations, for example. It can bring some relief, it can bring some reduction in pain, but these are major operations, very expensive, and not something you would undertake lightly. Our proposition would be that you give people the 2 injections, and if after a period of time they're not responding, they can still go into those more aggressive surgical procedures, but we think a very large number of patients will not need them anymore, because of the way we're treating the underlying cause of the disease. So we think that once this is known and proven on a larger scale, we've only done a relatively small scale study so far, and not yet in the United States, but we're working with very senior key opinion leaders in the US and in Europe, and they're very excited about the potential of this, as we are. So we don't see this as a disruptor of the treatment paradigm. It just gives you an opportunity to do something in that treatment sequence, which can be done quickly and simply, and will, in our view, reduce future cost and major surgery and get people back functioning again. And we think there's a very significant market potential for a drug doing it that way.
I mean, your trial showed that there were some benefits as early as a couple of weeks or a month after the injections, and that you could see some sort of continuing improvement out to 12 months. What about in terms of durability? Are you actually solving the problem permanently, or is this something that you think they may have to return to in a couple of years?
So the evidence from our founders' work, who've been working with this antibiotic approach for many years now, is that in the vast majority of patients, if you kill the infection and you see the benefits I've described, they don't relapse. And unless there's some physical damage to the spine, which could be the cause of an infection getting in, if that happened again, then of course it is possible that the problem might resurface. But in our experience, in our trial, and that does mirror what some of our founders' results were, was that the vast majority of patients don't relapse. The benefits are long-lasting. Our trial measured patients out to 12 months, and there were still signs that some further improvements may well be possible. So right now we would expect that the benefits you see are there for an extended period of time, to say the least.
In terms of actually really changing the game here, if you're going to scale this treatment, what sort of hurdles are you facing in terms of regulation and accessibility? Where's the big challenge for you there?
So we're currently designing the size and shape of the future phase 3 trials, which, as you will know, every drug has to go through before it can be approved for the market. We have our views on the size and shape of what those studies should look like, and number of patients that may participate in it. And we're in the process of going to the respective regulatory agents to get their views on our proposals and hopefully buy into them. This is normal practice. So, as I say, we're in the process of talking with the agencies to design those studies, and they will give us their view on what they would expect in terms of regulatory compliance. First and foremost, it's got to be safety. That's their number one driver. But we will also take advice from the industry and potential partners that we hope to work with around how they would pitch this in the marketplace, subject to the larger clinical trials being successful. But I think the advice we're getting from the market analysis that we've done, and also working with the very senior radiologists and surgeons that are part of our advisory group, They believe that the risk benefit of doing an injection for the benefits for the responders that I've described will make this a compelling story for the regulators. I guess we'll find out what their views are quite soon now.
You're working in Europe and North America or anywhere else?
So the trial we've completed was done in the UK, Spain, Denmark, and New Zealand. As I said earlier, we haven't yet been into the United States. The founding work was done in Denmark and carried on in London. We're a small company. We didn't have the global reach to go into the US. Some of the team did have first-hand experience of working with UK and European regulators. We actually got approvals to do our trial in other countries too, including France and Austria. But we believe that we're now having our first engagements with the US regulatory agencies, and at least one of those major phase 3 trials will be done in the US. So it's a step change for the company over the next small number of years. It's a step change for the development of the drug. It's very exciting, very challenging, but that's the normal path of a drug that's going to be developed for the global market.
You mentioned a few times the founders of the company have been working on this, the fundamental research for many years. Are they still creating new insights today? Are you still learning more from the trials that you're doing, the tests you're doing?
Well, one of the two key founders has been a long-time academic researcher in the field of back pain. So his work is continuing on multiple fronts. And then the second person, Hannah Albert, she published the first major clinical trial using oral antibiotics more than 10 years ago. And she is still treating people using that approach in her clinic. And that's where her focus is now. But their key contribution was to establish the link between chronic pain and an infection, and then get the approval to carry out a placebo-controlled study to demonstrate that that link was real. So that's, they're not working with us on new approaches to that, new approaches to this way of treating people. But of course, they're still active in the field, and they're aware of what's going on with other academic approaches to back pain, or what other companies or other research groups may be doing. So yes, there is still the use of antibiotics elsewhere, but the problem with the founders' approach, which is why we were set up in the first place, is it's very hard to get oral antibiotics into the disc. You need huge doses for an extended period of time, which causes all sorts of issues, and it's not the basis of a modern medicine, however great the founding research was.
Looking forward now, as you're moving towards these new studies, these new trials, as a CEO, as someone running the company there, where do you see the milestones for your company moving forward in the next couple of years? What are the big planks that you're moving towards?
Well, the next short-term milestone will be to get an agreement with the respective regulatory agencies on what they want to see in terms of the size and shape of these large-scale phase 3 trials. Once we understand and agree that, we can then design the program to design and have those trials approved. We're confident, appropriately confident, I think, that based on our founders' work and what we've seen in our own phase 1b study, that there's no obvious reason why the larger scale trials won't work as long as we select the right patients. So the short term thing is to get the approval to set those studies up and then do them. And hand in hand with that, and we've been working on this for 2 or 3 years, is to make sure we've got a manufacturing process that will be able to supply the drug for those studies and beyond, to the right quality, to meet all the regulatory requirements, and to be able to produce the drug at a scale that larger trials and eventually the market will need. So we're working on all of those things in parallel at the moment.
I guess we've talked a little bit about regulation, a little bit about the treatment landscape and how this might eventually be adopted by the market. But what about the other big plank there, which is funding? What are you doing to ensure that you can actually make this work and get the money in place?
Yeah, well, that's always the killer question, isn't it? And if you run a biotech company, whatever it is you're doing, I promise you, getting funding and continuity of funding is probably the thing I think about more than anything else. I have to say we've been incredibly well supported by our investors and shareholders to date. We worked very hard to keep them on board, and they've stayed on board over many years in some cases. But we're moving into a new era now. The larger scale trials and going into the United States will require both a pharmaceutical and a financial partner to help the company through the next stages. But with the great results we've had from our study and the fact that we've got a good base to build on, gives me confidence that we will do that. But as you can appreciate, going into large-scale trials, particularly if you're in 2 continents, it's not a cheap exercise. But there are plenty of organisations out there that if they believe in your story and the potential and for the ability for them to make money, we believe securing that funding is a viable option for us.
A final question from me. We're talking about treating chronic lower back pain with a non-opioid approach. If we think about pain more generally and the treatment of pain, can you see a future where opioids would be relied on a lot less for treating other pain conditions?
I'm not really an expert on the best use of other pain conditions in terms of what are the optimum analgesics to use, other than to say, as we've already touched on, the use of opioids is a difficult problem. There are other companies researching in all major international companies working in other pain treatments, different approaches to treating pain. That is something that we're not involved in. But I'm sure that the industry and academic researchers will continue to strive for approaches that get you away from opioids where possible. But pain R&D and development of new pain medication is a very challenging field. If you work in, for example, osteoarthritis, for example, some of the issues with other drugs that have happened in the past, if it was an easy thing to do, it would have already been done. But I'm sure continued work will go in to try and reduce the dependence on opioids for sure.
Steve Ruston, thanks for joining us today on Beyond Biotech.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget to check out all the latest news and analysis at Labiotech.eu. I hope wherever you are in the world, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.